for staying with us, and we're back. So before the break, I told you about Yusuf alayhi salam going to prison, and he shared the prison cell with the Pharaoh's butler and head cook. Now, both of these men had offended the king in some way, and were sent to the prison as a result. It was at this stage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enhanced Yusuf's blessings by giving him the gift of dream interpretation. Both of his cellmates had dreams which Yusuf was able to interpret as another sign of his prophecy. The butler's dream was that he was plucking 7 grapes and pressing them for wine to fill the king's cup. This showed that he would be spared and be replaced in his position. While the head cook's dream was of a basket filled with bread on the top of his head, and the bread was plucked away by the birds. This was evidence that he was going to die. Yusuf alayhi salam begged the butler to remember his innocence when he got out of prison, and although the butler did agree, he soon forgot. Over time, the king became plagued with a dream that none of his advisors could interpret. He called for all the wise men in the kingdom, but no one could recognize the symbols and provide a clear answer. It was then that the butler remembered Yusuf alayhi salam and told the king of his power for seeing through dreams. The king immediately had Yusuf cleaned, fed, and brought before him, where he then told him of the dream. In the king's dream, he saw himself along the banks of the river Nile. The river receded and the fish flopped about on the mud. 7 fat, healthy cows came out of the river, followed by 7 skinny and sickly cows. And then he watched in horror as the skinny cows killed and ate the healthy ones. Next, he saw 7 thick, large stalks of grain grow up from the mud, full of color and seed, but they then collapsed in the mud, and 7 dry, cracked, and thin stalks grew up in their place. Yusuf alayhi salam was shown that the dream meant Egypt would have 7 years of plenty when the Nile would provide water, grow livestock, and grain such as Egypt had not seen in generations. But then the Nile would dry up and a drought would choke the land. Yusuf alayhi salam advised the king to prepare stockhouses and store a portion of the harvest for the next 7 years, so that he may provide greatly for his people during the time of famine. Further, Yusuf alayhi salam was shown that after the 7th year of famine, the Egyptians should plant new seed, and the following year would be prosperous yet again. The king heard about Joseph's imprisonment and questioned his accusers in court, where they all admitted that he was innocent of the charges. Therefore, the king not only released Yusuf alayhi salam from prison, but added to his name and title, making him known as the Grand Vizier of all Egypt. Among his duties was to oversee the creation of storage houses and taxing the harvest of every farm, so that Egypt would be able to survive the coming famine. He also built and trained an army which was sent to defend and protect the Arab Ishmaelites. He constructed a great canal which fused the 2 rivers together and regulated water flow. Later, when the drought began, he instructed the practice of circumcision along with the dispensing of grains and other stored foods. Now at this time, Yusuf alayhi salam had been away from his home for nearly 20 years. And he would often retreat into his home and wear nothing but a sackcloth and fast for days while praying for a way that Allah might bring his family to him. The drought spread throughout the land and reached the area of Canaan where his family lived. Jacob alayhi salam had heard that Egypt was dispensing goods and sent his older sons to purchase grain for the family. Yusuf alayhi salam knew that this would happen, so he instructed everyone who came to get supplies that they would leave his name and his father's name. After an arranged meeting, Yusuf alayhi salam came to his brothers and pretended to divine in a cup as he told them all their history and all the deeds they had done. The brothers were shaken and they confessed the sins with true remorse. Now because of this, because of the mercy in Yusuf's heart given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Yusuf revealed who he was and invited them to bring all of their families to Egypt to live under care and protection. When Yaqub alayhi salam heard of this, he was overjoyed, as he had never given up hope that his son was still alive. The remaining 11 brothers led their families through the desert into Egypt and settled in land provided by the king. Yaqub was brought to Yusuf, and they both wept and embraced one another. Jacob alayhi salam had gone blind over the years, and Joseph alayhi salam was given the power to restore his sight by Allah, so that father and son could see another clearly once again. Joseph alayhi salam and his family lived among the Egyptians and prospered. About the same time as Joseph alayhi salam was another prophet called Shu'aib. Now, modern scholars have stated that Shu'aib is Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. However, the classical scholars and most Qur'an translators have determined there is no such merit in this statement. Shu'aib alayhi salam is known to be the great-grandson of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he was sent into the area which was visited by the prophet Idris in the past. Shu'aib alayhi salam called the people of Madian to the worship of one true God and abolish idol worship. Shu'aib's teaching were only heeded by a few, and the rest continued to worship idols and make a mockery of Allah. It was shortly afterward that the people again were destroyed by an earthquake, but the righteous believers followed Shu'aib as he told them of the coming catastrophe. The Israelites, as they were now called, grew in number among the Egyptians for over 400 years. During this time, the prophet Job alayhi salam was also known as Ayub in Islamic texts. Now, Ayub is known for being patient and persevering through hardships by placing his faith only in Allah. In the Qur'an, he is referred to several times as being a righteous and pious servant, in spite of being faced with much trouble in life. Job alayhi salam acted as advisor to one of the pharaohs who were struggling with the growing number of Jews among Egyptians. This pharaoh may have been Ramses I, but it is not clear. Ayub alayhi salam is among the Rasul, which means that he was given a portion of the message of Allah and was provided with the law of Allah. Whatever remains of his original message can be found in the book of Job in the Bible, although this was written many centuries after being handed down through oral tradition, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, it was shortly after the reign of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, who some scholars say is a grandson of Yusuf alayhi salam, that the pharaohs became resentful of a foreign people prospering in their own land and began treating the Jews cruelly. Finally, an order was passed to make all Jews slaves to Egyptians. This was creating the need for a great messenger of Allah, one who would take on more responsibilities than the others who had come before him. It was time for Moses alayhi salam. No prophet is more discussed in the Qur'an than the prophet Musa alayhi salam, and his life is well explained through Qur'an and Hadith. For this reason, all the information of Moses alayhi salam comes from these two sources alone. As the Pharaoh Ramses II took power in Egypt, the status of the Israelites became worse. All the children of Jacob, who was known as Israel, had settled and grown among the Egyptians for centuries. Over time, many had married into Egyptian families. Some had held prominent offices, and it is suggested by some historians that a pharaoh preceding Tutankhamun may actually have been an Israelite. Pharaoh was also gripped with jealousy and rage at the Israeli prosperity in his homeland, and he issued a command to kill every male child among the Jews in an effort to seal off the bloodline. This policy was made so every second year, all infant boys were